The lights of Studio 8G burned hotter than usual that evening. Every seat was filled, cameras hummed, and the air had that thick, restless charge that always precedes a televised confrontation. It wasn't just another celebrity segment. It was Donald Trump, the former president himself, stepping onto the stage of Late Night with Seth Meyers. From the moment he walked in, you could feel the studio's pulse quicken. Half the crowd cheered, the other half hissed, a clash of worlds echoing the divide of a nation. Trump, in his dark suit and crimson tie, flashed the trademark smile that said he was ready for battle, not banter. Seth Meyers rose from behind his desk to greet him. Their handshake lasted a heartbeat too long. Two men testing pressure, power, and pride. The audience clapped, unsure whether to laugh or hold their breath. The opening line was polite enough. "Welcome to the show, Mr. President." But behind Myers's smile lingered years of unfinished business. Everyone remembered the White House Correspondents' Dinner roast, the one where Myers's jokes had cut deep. Tonight was the first time the two men faced each other since that infamous night, and no one knew whether the exchange would stay civil or detonate live on camera. Trump leaned back, confident, already setting the tone. "It's great to be here," he said. "People get to see the real me, not the fake news version." The crowd rippled with mixed reactions. Myers's smirk widened, polite, controlled, but his eyes narrowed just slightly, as if marking the first crack in the dam. Then came the first volley, questions about politics, power, and the possibility of another run for office. Trump answered with sweeping gestures, turning each question into a campaign speech. He spoke of strength, of how people on the street begged him to save the country. Every sentence was a performance, carefully choreographed to sound spontaneous. Meyers listened, waiting, the corners of his mouth tightening each time Trump swerved away from specifics. A few in the audience laughed nervously. They could sense it too. The tone was shifting, banter becoming barbed. The applause sign flickered, but even the crew seemed distracted by what was unfolding. When Meyers finally interrupted, "Mr. Trump, that didn't answer my question," the temperature in the room dropped. Trump's eyes locked on his. "Sure it did," he said evenly. "You just didn't like the answer." A murmur ran through the studio. Something electric and unpredictable had entered the room. What began as a talk show appearance was turning into something else, something raw, unfiltered, historic. And that was only the opening round. The tension in the studio thickened like storm clouds gathering over calm water. Seth shuffled his cue cards but didn't glance down. The polite banter was over. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, voice lower, steadier. "Mr. Trump," he began, "let's talk about the investigations." For a split second, you could see Trump's jaw tighten. The smile froze on his face like a mask made of glass. The air turned heavy. Half the audience leaned in, sensing this was the moment things would turn. The other half shifted uneasily in their seats, unsure whether to cheer or brace for impact. Trump adjusted his tie, his tone calm but razor-edged. "You mean the witch hunts? The political hit jobs designed to keep me from serving the American people again?" Seth didn't flinch. "I mean the criminal cases. The ones filed by your own former allies. The people who worked for you." There was no laughter now. Only silence, the kind that television producers dread and audiences crave. Trump's smile vanished entirely. His eyes sharpened into that familiar glare, the look he used on debate stages, press briefings, and anyone who dared to challenge him. "They're liars," Trump snapped. "Bitter people who got fired and now want revenge. It's pathetic. Everyone knows it." Seth countered quietly, "Those bitter people testified under oath." The crowd murmured again, some gasping, others clapping nervously. Trump pointed at Seth, not angrily yet, but with that deliberate, rehearsed motion that always drew focus to him. "You see, this is why people hate the media," Trump said. "You twist facts, you make up stories, and then you sit there pretending to be honest. You're fake, Seth. You've always been fake." Seth smiled, not warmly, but with that thin, controlled expression that hosts wear when they're walking a tightrope over fire. "If I'm fake," he said softly, "then maybe you should show people the real truth instead of running from it." The audience gasped again. The battle lines were drawn. Trump leaned forward now, his voice booming. I'm not running from anything. I built this country's strongest economy. I made America respected again. And all you've done is make jokes about me to get applause from people who've never created a single job. Applause erupted, half cheering, half booing. The studio had become a living battlefield. Seth's voice sliced through the noise. That's rich, he said, pausing for effect. A billionaire calling himself a victim. That line hit like a slap. Trump froze for half a second, then leaned forward, voice thunderous. Rich? You want to talk about rich? You sit here reading jokes that someone else writes, pretending you're smart. I've built skyscrapers. I've led a nation. What have you done? The crowd exploded, laughter, cheers, boos, shouts. The sound was chaos. The producers in the shadows started whispering urgently into their headsets. This was no longer a late-night interview. It was turning into a televised reckoning. Seth didn't move. His voice dropped an octave. What I've done, he said, is ask you questions that every American deserves answers to. But you don't answer them. You attack the person asking. For a heartbeat, it was utterly silent. Two men, two worlds, one stage. Trump's face turned crimson. You want tough questions? He said. Ask me about fixing America. Ask me about putting people back to work. But no, you just want to humiliate me for ratings. Seth exhaled slowly. No, Mr. Trump, he said evenly. I just want the truth. And at that exact moment, the entire atmosphere of the studio shifted. No more jokes. No more pretense. The show had turned into something else entirely, a raw, live confrontation that neither man could control. The crowd could feel it, that shift from tension to danger. Every sentence now carried the weight of two egos colliding under blinding studio lights. Seth sat back in his chair, refusing to blink first. Trump, however, leaned forward, both hands on the desk like a man about to flip the entire table. You talk about truth, Trump said, voice steady but trembling with fury. But you wouldn't know truth if it hit you in the face. You read it off a teleprompter. Seth. Everything about you is scripted. Seth tilted his head. Everything except this conversation. That line landed like a spark in dry grass. Trump's expression darkened. You know, people like you, people who've never built anything, never taken a risk, you think you can sit there and lecture the people who've actually done something. You're a clown, Seth. Just another Hollywood mouthpiece. Gasps echoed through the studio. The sound engineers hesitated, unsure whether to cut the feed or let it roll. The control room was chaos. But on stage, the world had narrowed to just two men, a performer who made jokes for a living, and a former president who couldn't stand being one. Seth crossed his arms. You call me a clown, he said quietly, but the difference between us is I know when I'm joking. Trump's hand shot out, pointing at him. And that's exactly why people don't trust this garbage media. You hide behind sarcasm and smugness because you're afraid to face what's real. I've dealt with world leaders, Seth. I've negotiated billion-dollar deals. I've rebuilt cities. You can't even control your own show without a script. Seth straightened, voice calm but colder now. If you've rebuilt so much, why does every conversation around you end in chaos? The audience erupted. Laughter, clapping, even boos from the back rows. It was no longer entertainment. It was a battle, and everyone in the room knew it. Trump slammed his hand on the desk, not hard enough to break it, but hard enough to silence everyone. You think this is funny? You think this is clever television? He barked. You're mocking the millions of people who voted for me. You're mocking hardworking Americans who believe in this country. Seth rose from his seat slightly, matching Trump's energy. I'm not mocking anyone. I'm asking you to take responsibility. You say everyone lies. The courts, the journalists, your own advisors. Maybe, just maybe, the problem isn't them. Maybe it's you. The words hit like shrapnel. The crowd gasped again, louder this time. Trump's face reddened, his voice booming now, not controlled, not strategic. Don't you dare talk to me about responsibility. I gave everything for this country. And people like you twist it into a joke. Seth's voice dropped to a whisper, but the mic caught every syllable. Then maybe stop acting like the punchline. For a second, no one breathed. Even the cameras seemed to hold their frames still. Trump stood halfway out of his chair, glaring. His security detail tensed at the wings of the stage. The director's hand hovered over the cut to commercial button. The room was on the edge of something explosive, something no one could take back. And then Seth leaned forward and said it, the sentence that would become a headline in every paper the next morning. With all due respect, Mr. Trump, if this is how you handle questions, maybe you're not as tough as you think. The crowd froze. Trump's face hardened. And the next few seconds would make television history. Silence hung over Studio 8G like a held breath before a storm. The words had been said, the challenge thrown, the insult landed, and now both men stood on the knife's edge of no return. Trump rose fully from his chair, straightening his jacket with deliberate slowness. Not tough enough? He repeated, his voice echoing through the stunned studio. You think toughness is sitting behind a desk reading jokes someone else writes for you? His lapel mic quivered as his chest heaved. You wouldn't last 5 minutes in my world, Seth. Not 5 seconds in a room where real decisions are made, where you don't get a laugh track to save you when you fail. Seth didn't blink. He spoke evenly, but his words cut through the tension like a scalpel. Then why are you so afraid of being questioned? The audience gasped again. A wave of noise that rolled across the studio like thunder. Trump slammed a hand on the desk. The mug rattled, water splashing over the rim. You don't question, he growled. You provoke. You disrespect. You twist everything I say into a punchline for your fans. He jabbed a finger toward the audience. These people came to see a show, not another ambush from the liberal media. A few people in the crowd cheered. Others booed. It was chaos, a living, breathing split screen of America itself. Trump pointed directly at Seth. I came here as a courtesy. I gave you ratings. And this is how you treat me? You're a disgrace to journalism, to entertainment, to this country. Seth leaned forward slightly, his tone calm but merciless. I invited you for a conversation. But the moment someone disagrees with you, you call it disrespect. Maybe that's why you keep walking out, because deep down, you can't handle not being adored. The entire room froze. Trump's eyes flared. The smile vanished completely now. He ripped the microphone from his lapel, the sound screeching through the speakers, and tossed it onto the desk. Melting down, he barked, his voice now pure fire. You think this is a meltdown? I came here to talk to the American people. But you, he pointed again, shaking with fury, you just want to score cheap points with your little audience. The producers in the control room were shouting over one another. Cut to break. Cut to break. But no one moved. The cameras kept rolling. Seth stood too, now face to face with him across the desk like two boxers in opposite corners. You knew what show you were coming on, he said evenly. You knew I'd ask real questions. If you can't handle that, maybe you should leave. Trump's face turned scarlet. His voice dropped into a dangerous growl. Don't tell me what I can handle. You think you're brave because you hide behind applause? I've faced dictators, generals, world leaders, people with real power. You're just noise. Seth's response was quiet, almost whispering, but it sliced through the room. Then why are you shouting? The crowd gasped again. A few people clapped before quickly stopping. Trump's lips tightened, the vein in his temple pulsed. He looked around the studio, jaw clenched, fury radiating from him like heat. Then, with one sharp motion, he turned toward the audience and said, I don't need this. I don't need to sit here and be insulted by a late-night nobody. And with that, Donald Trump began to walk off the set. His Secret Service detail moved instantly, forming a quiet wall around him as he strode toward the edge of the stage. Behind him, Seth's voice followed like an echo. Running away doesn't make you right, Mr. President. It just makes you scared. Trump stopped. Slowly, he turned his head back, eyes blazing. And the entire studio, every camera, every audience member, every heartbeat, waited to see what he'd do next. For a heartbeat, it felt as if the whole world stopped spinning. Trump stood frozen mid-stride, his back to the desk, the blinding stage lights catching the edge of his red tie like a slash of fire. The audience barely dared to breathe. Then, slowly he turned around. What did you just say? His voice was low, almost calm. The kind of calm that comes before an explosion. Seth held his ground. I said running away doesn't make you right. Trump took a step forward, his shadow stretching across the floor like a wave. You really think you can talk to me like that? He said, each word deliberate. I've faced tougher people than you, dictators, billionaires, world leaders, and not one of them ever disrespected me on national television. Seth's reply was soft, but it carried across the studio. Maybe they should have. The audience gasped. Someone in the front row whispered, "Oh my God." Trump's lips curled. You think this is courage? You think insulting me makes you brave? You're a performer, Seth, that's all. You dance for applause. You pretend to be a journalist, but you're just another puppet for the same people who've tried to destroy me from day one. Seth's hands rested on the desk, knuckles white. If asking questions is destruction, then maybe truth was fragile to begin with. Trump laughed, a cold, hollow sound that didn't reach his eyes. Truth, he barked. You wouldn't know truth if it slapped you across that smug face of yours. You're what's wrong with America. People who've never built, never led, never sacrificed, sitting there judging the ones who did. He moved closer. The Secret Service tensed, ready. Cameras zoomed in. The air was electric, humming like live wire. Seth stood too, both men now eye level, inches apart. And you, he said, voice firm, are what happens when power forgets humility. For a split second, Trump didn't answer. His expression shifted, rage, disbelief, then something else. Wounded pride. The crowd murmured, torn between sides. One half cheered him, the other half hissed. The studio was no longer an audience, it was an arena. Then Trump leaned closer and hissed into the microphone. You just made the biggest mistake of your career. Seth met his stare without blinking. Maybe, he said, but at least I can sleep at night. The words detonated like a flashbang. Trump's face went crimson. You don't get to talk about morals, Meyers. You don't get to stand there pretending you're better than me when you make a living mocking others. He stopped, chest rising and falling. The rage had reached its limit. He grabbed the mic off the desk one last time and hurled it aside. I'm done here, he said, voice trembling not from fear but fury. You're a fraud. And you just proved it. As he turned toward the exit again, his security detail closed in. Producers shouted in panic, cut the feed. Cut now. But no one moved fast enough. The cameras were still rolling. Trump walked toward the glowing exit sign, the sound of divided applause chasing him down the aisle, cheers, boos, gasps, and the static hiss of history being made live. Back at the desk, Seth exhaled deeply, staring at the empty chair. Well, he said into the stunned silence, that just happened. The audience erupted again, not laughter this time, but shock. And somewhere backstage, Donald Trump was already rewriting the story in his own words. The moment Trump disappeared behind the curtain, the studio felt like a battlefield after the smoke cleared, silent, scorched, and uncertain of what had just happened. The applause light blinked uselessly, no one knew whether to clap or cry. Seth stayed frozen behind his desk, still staring at the door Trump had vanished through. The cameras were technically still live, but the energy had drained from the room like air escaping a balloon. Backstage, everything was the opposite of quiet. Trump's team swarmed him the instant he cleared the stage. Secret Service agents formed a tight wall, guiding him toward the dressing corridor. His communications director, phone pressed to her ear, was already drafting the headline she wanted the world to read. Trump walks out on disrespectful host. Trump's stride was sharp, furious but triumphant. Did you see that? He barked. He showed everyone exactly what I deal with, total bias, total disrespect. This will be everywhere tomorrow. One of his aides hesitated. Sir, maybe we should have. Trump cut him off. No. People respect strength. I didn't lose my temper, I took a stand. They'll see that. In the control room, producers were shouting over one another. Cut to commercial, someone yelled. Do we still have audio? Where's the next segment? But nothing followed the usual script. Viewers at home were still staring at a live shot of Seth Meyers sitting motionless, hands clasped, the faint hum of the audience filling the silence. Finally, Seth exhaled, forcing a thin smile. "Well," he said, voice trembling just enough to be human, "that was something." A few uneasy laughs rippled through the studio. He straightened his notes, trying to regain the rhythm of a show that no longer existed. Minutes later, as the next guest was hurried on stage to salvage the broadcast, the internet had already exploded. Clips of the confrontation flooded social media, each one trimmed, captioned, and weaponized. Team Trump. He stood up to a smug liberal who couldn't handle the truth. Team Meyers. He asked real questions and Trump ran away. Millions of comments in minutes. Hashtags erupted. Hashtag Trump storms off. Hashtag late night meltdown. Hashtag Meyers versus Trump. News outlets scrambled for footage. Pundits lined up to claim angles. Some called it the most shocking live TV moment since the 1980s. Others called it proof that political discourse was dead. Meanwhile, backstage, Seth sat alone in his dressing room. The laughter from the next segment muffled through the door, but his eyes were on the monitor replaying the moment in slow motion. Trump ripping off the mic, the audience gasping, the freeze frame of power meeting defiance. A producer entered quietly. "You okay?" Seth nodded slowly. "Yeah. I just keep replaying it, wondering if I pushed too far." "You asked questions," the producer said. "That's your job." "Yeah," Seth murmured. "But I didn't expect to watch a president walk out on live TV." He leaned back, rubbing his temples. Outside, through the studio walls, he could already hear the chants from the street. Reporters, fans, protesters, everyone wanting a piece of the chaos. A few blocks away, Trump was already in his SUV, calling into a friendly network to tell his side of the story. His voice was calm again, polished. "Seth Meyers ambushed me," he said smoothly. "I tried to have a civilized conversation, but when someone attacks you, you walk away. That's strength." By the time his motorcade hit Fifth Avenue, headlines were already breaking. Trump walks out mid-interview, sparks nationwide debate. Late night turns to war. Both men sat in separate rooms, miles apart, watching themselves on different screens. Two faces, two narratives, one explosion that neither could take back. And outside, the digital storm had only just begun. Morning came like an aftershock. By sunrise, every major outlet in America had turned the walk-off into breaking news. The confrontation dominated headlines, feeds, and talk shows across the nation. CNN, Trump explodes on late night, walks off in fury. Fox News, Trump refuses to be ambushed, stands up to media bias. Twitter, now a war zone of hashtags, reactions, and endless debate. Clips from the interview replayed on every platform, looped into memes, remixes, even dramatic reenactments. The video racked up tens of millions of views within hours, trending #1 worldwide. Every gesture, every pause, every glare was dissected like evidence in a courtroom of public opinion. Inside Trump Tower, the mood was almost celebratory. Trump's staff moved like a campaign in motion. "We'll spin it our way," one advisor said, already drafting social posts. "You looked strong, decisive, calm under fire." Trump smirked, scrolling through his phone. "Everyone's talking about me again," he said. "They can't help themselves. I don't lose, I dominate the conversation." He posted minutes later. Walked out on Seth Meyers after he crossed the line. No respect, no balance, just hate. You can't bully strength. America saw it. Within seconds, the post exploded with likes, retweets, and fury. His supporters called it legendary. His critics called it cowardice. But either way, everyone was watching. Meanwhile, at 30 Rockefeller Plaza, Seth Meyers sat in a small conference room with his producers. Empty coffee cups, dark circles under eyes. The team looked like they'd been through a war. One of the assistants broke the silence. "You should open tonight's show with it," she said quietly. Seth rubbed his chin. "Yeah," he said, voice weary. "We can't ignore it." That night, the camera faded in on a quiet studio. No music, no laughter, just Seth, alone behind the desk. He looked straight into the lens and said, "Last night, we had an interview that didn't go as planned. But here's the truth, my job isn't to make guests comfortable. It's to ask hard questions. If power can't handle that, then comedy isn't the problem, accountability is." The audience rose in applause. Some cheered passionately. Others sat unsure, conflicted, thoughtful. For a moment, Seth's expression softened. "We're living in a time," he said, "where even an interview becomes a battlefield. Maybe the real story isn't about who walked off, but about why we can't stay in the same room anymore." That line replayed across the internet, quoted in thousands of posts. It hit something deeper, beyond politics, beyond ego, something about America itself. In the weeks that followed, the clip became a cultural touchstone. Analysts debated whether Trump's exit was strategy or emotion. Supporters printed the phrase, "walked out like a boss," on t-shirts. Late-night fans praised Seth for holding his ground. Memes, parodies, fan edits, the moment took on a life of its own. But beneath the noise, one truth remained unshakable. That night wasn't just about a walk-off. It was about what happens when pride meets pressure, when truth clashes with power, and when two worlds, political and comedic, collide on live television with nowhere to hide. Both men walked away believing they'd won. But history, as always, decided for itself. So what do you think? Did Seth Meyers cross the line, or did Donald Trump show real strength by walking off? Was it a meltdown, or a masterclass in control? Speech Balloon, tell us what you believe in the comments below. Thumbs up, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real stories that shook the world. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't happen behind closed doors. It happens live.